and get to talk with you.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you again too. Look, I want to honour everyone's time. So Megan is here, but I actually do have quite a few questions that people have emailed me because they can't make it. So Megan, I will leave it to you. I might just turn Megan's microphone on or ask you to unmute so that you can participate at any time, Megan, because you've got the gold star for turning up.
Hi, good to see you.
And I have got quite a few questions from people that couldn't make it, but I guess what I might just do is I don't think I need to introduce Beth or myself. I might just start by asking Megan if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us before going on to those. We might just have a general chat.
Yeah, I don't really have any direct questions right now. I'm kind of here to learn and
be
here. So maybe I will in a little bit, but right
good.
now I don't.
Okay, awesome.
Good to have you, Megan.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just jump in. You get the gold star for turning up. I know I have had a lot of questions. So I might just start with a really simple question, which Kathleen is asking, what do you both wish you had known at the beginning of your journey that you know now?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah. You want to go first? You want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
If I had known that my stress states were more impactful to my health than my supplements or my medications or my meditation, if I had really understood that fully and been in a place where I could also have owned it, because that was the last piece for me. And we haven't gotten to catch up, Alison, but my health has really turned around this year. I'm off of almost all my meds, almost all my supplements, and I was really struggling. I had a big flare when I came back from California. And stress makes us feel unsafe. And being in relationships with people who are not emotionally safe has such a huge impact on our health. And it's easy to have blinders on about that. And so if I had known that, I would have been out of this so much sooner. And I see this over and over in the practice to people who are stuck or spin their wheels. My clients had lapped and lapped and lapped and lapped me. And it's just,
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that was my first reaction. I mean, I share freely about, working out whether you're in a health or a sickness model, because I find a lot of people are in a sickness model thinking they're going to get healthy. But without a doubt, the biggest difference is modulating your stress. So I find a lot of people just aren't ready to do that, and that's okay.
And I wrote my master's thesis on this.
And but it's like unraveling layers.
It is. That's it. It's layers.
Yeah. And when people work with me, the first three modules of my course and the first sort of 2 or 3 months of work is really just getting an emotional regulation routine. So I don't know about you, Beth, but when I do my intakes, I actually ask what stress events have happened in their life and in their parents' life.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then I ask them what supports they've got. And often my clients tell me that I'm the only practitioner that's ever asked them.
Yeah.
about what's happened in their life. And it just, it just sticks out as the number one bucket. So do you have that experience as well, in terms of when people are coming to you, maybe they're meditating, or, maybe they're doing yoga, but there's not really emotional balance and regulation routine around them?
Everyone that comes in. I mean, and, Kelly McCann's talk where I interviewed her, she talked about, we talked about what does it take to heal. And this was such a powerful talk, and I really hope people listen to it, because she said, it all boils down to, are we going to love ourselves?
Yeah.
Are we going to love ourselves enough to do what it takes to heal? And sometimes we have to do things that are really inconvenient, or we wouldn't want to do.
Yeah.
And I was thinking too, and most of my clients come in, they don't have that emotional support structure. They don't have the community. They don't have, some do, but most don't have family coming and checking on them, because we don't even have a social context for this. As we were talking, I was saying, the other thing, if I could pick two things I wish I'd known at the beginning, the other was that the bigger context of it all. Because I felt like such a victim for a long time, because I mean, I started getting sick when I was a teenager. I really, we go back about 8 years old is when my symptoms really started. And I always had issues before then, but 16, it really kicked up. And then 21, I couldn't get out of bed. And that's when I had turned down a scholarship to med school. And then 26, I couldn't walk anymore. So I went from being very athletic, standing on my head, dropping into back bends, and bicycling 30, 40 miles, to I could barely lie down, put my feet against the wall and do a line down mountain, and I couldn't take my arms overhead. And I didn't know anyone in their 20s that had those symptoms, that were sensitive. I was getting sensitive, none of that. And when I went to doctors, that was also part of the shock, was there weren't young, sick people then. I mean, I'm 45. So we're talking 20 years ago. There weren't as many young, chronically ill people. And so I just really felt like all of this was happening to me, and just to me, because there was no one in my world. And I didn't have anyone in my world until a good 6 years later, when I found Yasmin and Kellensten's work. So 6 years of not walking.
Wow.
But if I had known what I was meant to do with what was happening, it would have eased the suffering. And if I had known that this wasn't happening to me, it's happening to all of us, because of how we've forgotten to love ourselves and each other in the world, and our earth, our home, we've forgotten. And so those of us with MCAS, and this is why I talk about my talk, those of us with MCAS are just the canaries in the coal mine. We're the alarm bells going, this world's not safe. This world's not safe. We've got MCAS, we've got sensitivities. Or you can get stage 4 colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. We're all dying from this. We're all getting really sick. Thank God, in my own opinions, this is my perspective on it for myself now. Thank God it happened so soon for me, that I had time to turn my life around and turn my health around before it was terminal. But then what that morphed into over time was, having gone through this and experienced it, and having even known about MCAS years before it was an official diagnosis, like you did, Alison, and you've been in this longer than I have, and so we were really bringing things forward before there was a lot of information out there, and that there's in recovering my health, I now have a responsibility to, not for, but to the world, to bring forward and help and lead this change. But that's not just me leading it, it's all of us. All of us, whether we have a platform like you and I have, Alison, or we're parents, or we can influence a friend, just not even by a conversation, but by our choices at the grocery store. at our choices and, how we use energy, how we use electricity, and our choices of whether or not we scowl at somebody or we say, gosh, are you okay? How's your day going? And that's how we change this so that our great grandchildren don't have to do this and their great grandchildren don't have to do this. So if I had that context at the beginning, I don't think it would have been just as painful, but I wouldn't have suffered as much.
No. Yeah. I mean, some of the biggest differences I see in my clients is when they do the emotional work, when they sort of almost, because I use a variety of techniques, but I have one practitioner in particular I often start people with. And like I almost feel like I see them for the first time, really see them when they come back. Like, they come alive. So let me go on to another question, which is from Nina. And she says, how is MCAS diagnosed? Are there specific blood tests? How do you know if MCAS is genetic or causes of mold or load of chemical toxicity? Do you know by symptoms that it's MCAS as a result of mold or chemical toxicity, or is it individual?
You might have to break those down for me.
Yeah.
We can start with diagnosis.
I think let's just, I guess she wants to know how, specifically, how is MCAS diagnosed?
Yeah.
How do you know if it's genetic or environmental? And can we distinguish the symptoms of mold and chemical toxicity for MCAS? Yeah. So let's just start with the first question. Sorry, I'm bombarding you.
No, that's good.
So
and they're all tied in. So that's a good series of questions. The diagnosis is still tricky. And I'll talk about the official diagnostic criteria and then what's actually happening. So we have to remember that MCAS got a official diagnostic code, an ICD-10 code in 2016. Compared to having diagnostic criteria for type 2 diabetes or Alzheimer's, this is really in its infancy, although it's been studied since the 1980s. But in that criteria, and there's two camps, there's consensus 1 and consensus 2. So that's important to know because there's a lot of debate, and that consensus 1 camp says a blood marker called tryptase must be elevated in MCAS. Consensus 2 diagnostic criteria says tryptase is rarely elevated, but we've got 10 or 12 blood markers and urinary markers that we can use. And those include things like N-methylhistamine, a urinary sample, a 24-hour urinary sample for N-methylhistamine, blood histamine, prostaglandin D2, chromogranin A. These are some of the ones that are being tested. Another way to check is to get a cell tissue stain, CD157, I believe. Sometimes they'll do that in a GI tract biopsy or a bone marrow biopsy or, things like that. And so you have to have, according to that criteria, a 1 positive marker out of there. Plus, you have to have symptoms in 2 or more systems. So it could be GI and brain fog, or it could be skin and cardiovascular, but there has to be 2 or more systems involved. And that can't be explained. So it's a differential diagnosis, can't be explained by anything else. And this is all education. We're not diagnosing anybody. And then you have to have a positive response to an antihistamine or mast cell stabilizing medication. So you got to meet all 3 criteria to get the diagnosis. And we've got to have somewhere to start and just to get this into more research. And it's not even taught in medical schools yet. We've got to go through this process to get it into medical schools. That said, The challenges are that there's over 1,000 different mast cell mediators, and we can measure about a dozen. Research labs have more. Nobody's going to get their blood run through a research lab unless you're part of a study. And those mediators, so we're talking about we've got what, 10 to 12 out of 1,000. So we've got 0.1% that we can measure. And then we have these mediators are up and down the bloodstream very quickly. Some of them don't even release in people's bloodstreams or in other tissues. So how do we even know that we're catching the mediators that they were releasing or at the right time? And I've known medical practitioners who had their patients come in. They had the ability to run the tests in the office, and they'd have them sit there and test them every hour on the hour, and they had them provoke all kinds of stuff that would trigger them just to try to get that elevated marker to try to get insurance coverage. This is the boat that we're in. Mm. When I've talked with colleagues in this field who do diagnostic testing, they've told me that they suspect it's only catching about 10% of cases. Yeah. Then the other challenge is that these tests are very finicky. It's not like getting blood count or liver enzymes measured. They have to be processed through a cold centrifuge. Very few labs in the U.S. have that. I don't know about there in Australia, Alison, but there's just a Rupp laboratory has it. Very few. It's very expensive. Quest LabCorp don't have those in their local labs. And so it's mostly mishandled anyway, which adds to the challenge in getting those. Now, I will say Larry Afrin, who's one of our frontline researchers and somebody I really respect and appreciate his work, he does think that we can catch it if we get it processed properly. But these are kind of differing opinions that are out there. The problem with the diagnostic criteria around the improvement to mast cell medications is that almost all medications, as they're formulated, have something in them that triggers MCAS in some people, whether it's titanium dioxide, cornstarch, lactose, dyes, even cromolyn sodium has no fillers, but it's in a plastic ampule that has BPA. Yeah. And so those trigger some people. And so you could not realize you had a positive mast cell response because you're reacting to an inactive ingredient. So what's really happening? Because what people really want to know is they're asking, how do I get my doctor to diagnose me so I get insurance coverage? That's that answer. Or they're asking, how do I know if I have MCAS? Yeah. What I tell most people is get thoroughly checked out, get everything ruled out, have your medical workup. That's really important. And then check the symptom survey that we've got up, or if you've got something, Alison, where you just go through and you count the number of symptoms that you have. The more symptoms you have that are inflammatory, that wax and wane, even if you're sick all the time, you're still going to have some shifting in symptoms. Then I would really look into it, because now the definition Larry Afrin uses, I think, is the most helpful way to look at it, which is MCAS is multisystemic in 2 or more systems, inflammatory condition that waxes and wanes, and it's with or without anaphylaxis, with or without allergy, and then I like to add with or without hypersensitivity. And so if we have any inflammatory condition, we need to look at MCAS. If we've got autoimmune conditions, if we've got cancer history, if we've got EDS, if we've got POTS, all of those things are connected and correlated. On the genetic piece, there's 2 camps on that. There's the camp that's reductionistic, that's traditional medicine, that wants 1 marker per genetic disease. And so we have for mastocytosis, the KIT genes, but then there's only 1 SNP of the KIT genes that counts. What do the rest of them do? We don't care. We just need that 1 gene. It's kind of how that research world goes. But from studying functional genetics, there are thousands and thousands of genes that affect MCAS. Histamine receptors. There are genetics for cytokines that if they're upregulated and they're inflammatory cytokines, we're going to produce more inflammation. If they're downregulated on the anti-inflammatory cytokines, we can't resolve the inflammation. Even the pathways for how we produce pro-resolving mediators out of omega-3s to resolve inflammation, if that's not working. Iron regulation genes, if we're overaccumulating iron, we trend towards anemia, all of that. We have hormone dysregulation. But there is a rare clonal, it's called clonal MCAS. It's not very common. Most MCAS is secondary. And what it means is triggered by the environment, by stressors, by infection. So it all comes down to triggers are toxins, pathogens, stressors. It can be physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, you name it, energetic. And what was that last question, Alison? That was really
differentiating symptoms between mold and chemical toxicity.
I don't think we can, because we're talking about, with mold, a trigger to MCAS, a massive trigger. It's theoretically possible, but I have never met anyone really sick with mold toxicity or tick-borne illness that did not have MCAS. That's part of the defense mechanism in addressing those things. So it's kind of like saying, well, you know, how do you have a fish with no water? Well, it's dead, but you know, fish come with water. And then on the chemical sensitivity, you can have chemical sensitivity without MCAS, but typically they go hand in hand, because what triggers chemical sensitivity tends to trigger MCAS. And what triggers that is overexposure to toxins, limbic dysregulation from toxins, pathogen stressors. So kind of back in the same thing. So we got to think more like interwoven. How's it all interwoven? And when I teach, I have a buckyball image that has like 100 points. And on there I have, you know, got our biochemical, our genetic, our spiritual, our social, our, you know, our family constellation. We've got, you know, our cerebral spinal fluid rhythm. We've got what's happening energetically, what's happening cosmically, all interconnected. And then what are our toxins? What are our pathogens? And that's how we have to look at cases. And so MCAS is just an expression of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, because as a health coach, I'm working on health restoration.
Yeah.
That's not to say these other interventions aren't useful or needed or anything else. And I think for me, I actually encourage people not to get diagnosed, but to focus on healing opportunities, because sometimes getting a diagnosis, not always, and I understand the need for insurance purposes, but sometimes getting the diagnosis becomes another stressor I need to remove. I have MCAS, therefore I can't do it. Yeah. Sort of thing. The way I think of the MCAS world, and I totally agree with everything you've said, but in terms of walking yourself out of the scenario, I see 4 buckets: infections, toxins, unprocessed stress, which is probably twice the size of the other buckets, and electrical stresses. So it can be things like the jaw, can be whatever.
The nervous.
And what I see, just from a conceptual position, is we may have a build-up in the extracellular area of toxins and infections. That's not MCAS. It's likely histamine intolerance, to be honest. Then we get blocked elimination or drainage or blocked extracellular matrix, so we can't actually move those out. That then leaves us at risk of damaging the cell and things then entering the cell. So if we think just about our own scenario, you may have all 4 of those buckets filling, but the question is, where are you in terms of your body's ability to deal with them? So at one end, if it's just extracellular, we're likely to have histamine intolerancy type symptoms. We know that's very gut-based. And at the other end of the spectrum, where we've got, say, Lyme and Co entering cells, heavy metals entering cells, and the cells start to falter, we're much more likely to think of mast cell type symptoms. But you can't, all four of those buckets may be in play and simultaneously. Typically, there's one bucket tipping everything over. I have people with virtually no infections, but their unprocessed stress is completely blocking their nervous system. So so the environment pulls the trigger always. Now, I don't actually want to say always in my client base.
Yeah, I mean, there are those really rare.
The environment is the trigger. And look, there are people who are more in a medical model, and we've touched on that as well. But that's just sort of what I hope would be a simplistic summary for everyone. And we do notice that there is an overall pattern, which is if you have an unprocessed stress or an electrical stressor, you're more likely to have a buildup of toxins, and you're more likely to lead to infections in the places the toxins are. So I think in answer to Nina's question, we just want to stay focused on the environment, and something I encourage my clients to do is go, right, I'm feeling overwhelmed, this, it could be this, it could be that. It's like, right, well, what's one thing you could do today that could empty one of those buckets? Do you need to turn your Wi-Fi off and plug it in? Do you need to go and see a dentist? Do you need to start processing stress? Do you need to look at the toxins in your environment? What's one thing you can do today to empty those buckets? Because that's what works in my client base. So I think, I hope that is helpful in terms of, I've oversimplified the technical component, but that's sort of, I guess, a very simple way of looking at it. Now, Em has got some questions. Okay, how does one go about discerning which limbic retraining program might be the right one? Meaning, what principles should one use to tease out which program is better? I've looked at the variety of programs and found others myself. One I came across is the MAP method. I don't have a practitioner helping me manage my health, so having some guidelines for discerning would be helpful. My health is stable right now, but I want to get off the meds I'm on. Good question. Yay. Thank you. Beth.
Well, I go to one of my favorite quotes from Thich Nhat Hanh, which is he was asked, what's the best meditation? And he said, the one you do. And there are so many great limbic programs, and I'm just grateful that there's so many options, because not everything speaks to everybody. So what I usually tell my clients to do is go watch a video with the person putting it on and see if you resonate with them. Do you like their energy? Does that person feel safe to you? Does listening to their voice calm you down? That's the most important thing, more than the content, is do you feel safe with that person? Because that's what we're really doing, is coming back to a sense of safety. And we can't heal if we don't feel safe, and a place of safety. And we're social creatures. So safety for us is safety within ourselves and others. And it's coming back to that safety in community, which is key. I've had a lot of people take Gupta. I've had a lot of people take DNRS. Those programs appeal to different people. I've not tried the MAP method. I've heard some good things about it. I've been recommending Kathleen King's Primal Trust Academy a lot lately, and we've got a talk by her that I'd really encourage people to listen to, because it's so inspiring. And she was incredibly sensitive, and she couldn't start with breathing practices, and she couldn't even start with a limbic program. So what I love about her program is it's from somebody who's had incas, from somebody who's had extreme PTSD and extreme dysregulation and extreme sensitivities. And it's trauma informed, and she just gets it, and it's really good. And there's a lot in there. And for some people, it's overwhelming and it's too much. So it's really just picking one. I've done multiple programs, limbic programs. And I keep, I go through one and I get a lot out of it. And then I go to another one because I get more out of it. And I'll probably always do these programs, but
I think that's a really good point, that that limbic training and dealing with that unprocessed stress bucket is like peeling an onion. And I know for myself, I don't know about you, Beth, but I've done a huge amount of work in that area. And about once a year, I go back for a tune-up now. Mm-hmm. So, and I just have a range of tools and modalities, and I go, oh, that's family constellations, that's EFT, that's, so I think don't be worried about the perfect program. Just as Beth has recommended, just see who resonates with you, because you just want to start, and then learn to trust your intuition as to what you need next. Something I find very helpful is, even if you, I'll send a link to the book. I think it's called Anchored. And so it's an explanation of the polyvagal theory, which just explains really the various levels of response of your autonomic nervous system to a threat. So I think just even starting to recognize that you're stressed can be helpful. But I think I've heard good things about Primal Trust. I haven't looked at it in detail. I like a Gupta type approach. I do that with clients myself. So a lot of what you're really wanting is also role modeling and a chance to experiment for yourself. I like the Gupta approach personally. One thing that I find with DNRS, without in any way discrediting that work, is that quite often clients feel like they need to do DNRS for the rest of their life without realizing that they can sort of move on from that program. Mm-hmm. But really, I love family constellations. I love EFT, polyvagal work. I just pick someone, somatic work, just pick someone that resonates with you, and it will unfold and evolve from there. I totally agree with Beth on that point.
Yeah, the key is to keep moving forward and taking care of ourselves, and to know it's a lifelong journey. I'm not getting to the point where I'm like, great, I don't need any more nervous system work anymore, because I was primed from childhood to have a very overdeveloped amygdala and limbic system. And so I'm always pruning that limbic system to be less overactive and not have to be so hypervigilant. And even outside of that, I was born with a really sensitive system. Neil Nathan we were just standing, and he was doing some cranial work on me, and an airplane went over, and he just starts chuckling. And I'm like, what? And he goes, did you hear that airplane? And I said, no. He said, well, your system shut down as soon as it came over. Yeah, right. And
Yeah.
so that's just, how it is for me. And I'll always want to soothe and take care of my nervous system. So we live in a really chaotic, stressful world. Most of people with MCAS are empaths and highly sensitive. And yeah, it's a journey. So there's always something to learn from every program, I guess, is the bottom. And know that you don't have to pick, like you said, the one perfect one. We can get what we get out of it, and then we go to another one.
And I mean, I think the overarching goal here is not just to learn something, and there is another question on limbic training I'll come to, I can see it, Megan, is that the overall goal is to develop a health routine. So, as Beth was saying, we're not going to do, we're not going to do a course and then never have to regulate our nervous system again. I regulate my nervous system continuously throughout the day. How do I feel? What do I need? What's my body like? It takes 5 minutes maximum, probably 2. But, it's about a routine and an environment that keeps us healthy. So another question is, I have a question that's limbic related to, do you think it is necessary to do the 1 to 1.5 hours for healing that most of the programs recommend?
Depends, depends on the state of your nervous system. There was a nervous system course I made, where I have a symptom survey on the nervous system. Are you sensitive to smells like chemical smells, paints, gasoline, and so on? Do you have trouble sleeping? Are you sensitive to light? Do you startle if somebody's behind you and you don't know it and they say your name? Do you have a weak or a really strong gag reflex? Have you had a history of mold toxicity? Have you had a history of Bartonella, which infects the nervous system? So there's a variety of questions like that. And then you rate yourself, and it puts you in how haywire is your mast cell nervous system axis. And so slightly haywired, tell people, maybe 20 minutes a day if you're just in that very slight category. If it's moderate, then you might be wanting to do more like a half an hour to 40 minutes, maybe a day. If you're in the significantly dysregulated, then you might be wanting an hour to an hour and a half. If you're in the severely dysregulated category like I was, 2 hours might be good, might not feel like enough. But I think it's really about, again, just what you were saying, Alison, because we're usually on the same page, is it's really about listening. What does my body need right now? What is my body requiring? And I've been through some significant transformations this year, and I feel like my whole structure is changing. And so I'm needing hours and hours right now to just watch the birds and listen to the birds and watch the light. Periods in my life, even right now, I don't get that luxury very often. So I'm shaping my life so I'm going to be able to get that more. And I'm more regulated now than I've ever been in my life. But I'm finding I need that right now because of all these changes that are happening for me. When I was really, really sick, I couldn't do anything else. So why not breathe for half an hour and then I would listen to, back then it was HemiSync, because we didn't have Brain Tap and New Calm and all that. And I'd listen to one of those for half an hour, and I still couldn't get out of bed. Okay, let's do a little more breathing. But when you got kids and everything, you gotta do what gets you regulated every day. And that's, I think, the most important thing is that we're all different. We all have different needs. We all have different lives. We just have to be really honest with ourselves, because I'm the queen of denial and pretending.
Aren't we all?
And going, I'm fine. I'm just bleeding down my leg, but I'll make it. I can get the rest of these dishes done, and I'm about to fall over, but I'll be okay. And that's not being honest with myself. And then I can't really serve anybody because I'm a mess. but I think it's just being really honest and being willing to love ourselves so much. We can be really honest about what we really need.
What I do with my clients, and I mean, initially it might take more, it takes however long it takes to sort of master these things. But the first point is to really know what your body feels like when you're regulated. Now, a lot of my clients don't know what it feels like for their body to feel regulated. But then what I like to do is get clients to check in 5 times a day, when you get up, when you open your eyes, when you have your breakfast, when you have lunch, when you have dinner, when you go to bed, and just, how does my body feel? What level am I at in the polyvagal scale? Am I in shut down? Am I in flight and fight, or am I balanced? And then I teach a range of tools to re-regulate people. There are 5 tools. It's really great. I had a client who knows what her body feels like to be truly regulated for about the first time in her life. And so she's now saying, I don't want anyone to interfere with this balance. So we're practicing boundaries and all those good things. So once the tools are mastered and provided they're done regularly, the more you get yourself regulated, the easier it is to keep yourself regulated. But the more dysregulated you are, the more time it might take to do the tools. I'm not sure. And the more you take care of yourself, like eating right, getting enough sleep, setting boundaries with people that need a boundary and so on, the less work you'll have to do to regulate yourself. So that's sort of my quick and dirty answer on that. Okay, I've got another question here, which is, can estrogen alone cause MCAS problems to worsen, or will estrogen only cause problems if the person is estrogen dominant? For example, if a premenopausal or menopausal woman has MCAS plus low estrogen and wants to try bioidentical hormones, would taking bioidentical estrogen increase their MCAS problems? Also, would progesterone drops or creams have any effect on MCAS?
They're good questions. Now I'm going to answer because we've got so much to cover, a high level, but then I really want to refer people to Tanya Dempsey's talk, because she got into that in some really nice depth. But as a general rule, and then this is the land of exceptions anyway, we're all off the map. We're all the exceptions. So it's hard to have a general rule, but about 80% of people I've worked with, progesterone tends to be, when introduced in the right time, mast cell stabilizing, and estrogen unopposed or at the wrong time can be mast cell degranulating. And I have seen lots of cases where progesterone was triggering, particularly in mold toxicity, where hormones become Alice in Wonderland. And I've seen lots of cases where estrogen was mast cell stabilizing for somebody. The functional mindset around hormones is we don't ever want to give estrogen unopposed without progesterone. And that's primarily because estrogen is really tricky, even bioidentical in terms of cancer risk, if we get into estrogen dominance land. So we really want to turn estrogen dominance around. I have had 3 cases of extreme progesterone dominance, and it looked just like estrogen dominance. So that's what I mean by Alice in Wonderland, and, go by symptoms. And the way I was trained was go by symptoms. This was early in my career, and gave a little progesterone and sent the person off the edge of the cliff and went, crap, that failed. What happened? And, we go back and test, and it's like, oh, you look estrogen dominant, but you're not. So I tell that story to say, just please get a Dutch test or something like that before you mess with hormones. Know what you're messing with and work with somebody who's experienced if you've got mold toxicity or Lyme or any of those things. If you don't and you're super healthy, you're probably not on this Q&A or listening to it. But so mast cells do have estrogen receptors. They have progesterone receptors, testosterone receptors. They have thyroid hormone receptors. This is why it's called psychoneuroendocrino-immunology, and should have gastro in there as well for the GI tract. But when I recommend somebody introduce bioidentical progesterone or estrogen and all that, if the labs are indicating that we look like we're in that picture, then blood works really hard on hormones. So I would get blood. I would get at least blood and urine. If you can afford it, blood, urine, and saliva. So you got 3 points of data, because this is tricky. But we try to introduce progesterone first. Now, my client base is really sensitive, so they usually start with a drop of sublingual. The other thing I can share about progesterone is it's much better to do a sublingual, a topical, rather than something you're going to swallow. It's going to get processed through the liver, as you don't get as much. It's harder on the liver. You want it to go straight in the bloodstream, whether you're doing topical or sublingual. But we get the estrogen really at a good, strong place. It's the progesterone in a good, stable place. And then if somebody needs estrogen, they can bring that in little by little. I rarely recommend estrogen. I usually refer to a hormone specialist. But I'll instead work upstream with like DHEA or estrogen balancers and precursors and things like that. Just be careful with that estrogen. And if you have MCAS, please don't do synthetic hormones. And I've had one exception to that, where she had extreme reactions to bioidentical, and the synthetic was the only thing that kept things controlled. So in this, we can't have blanket things, but please don't do synthetics unless you're really in that camp that she was in. She already tried everything else.
Yeah. And this is actually a practitioner, and what I just want to build on what Beth has just said, because I've had similar experiences, is hormones are not the cause. Hormones are responding to something. So before you even think about giving hormones, ask why.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, both histamine intolerance and mast cell activation is highly prevalent in perimenopausal women, where hormones are making a difference. But arguably, you might get where you want, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, you might be much better coming back to those buckets. Like, we know the gut and the liver have tremendous influence on, for example, estrogen metabolism. So, coming back to the buckets of what is driving this, and am I going to get those balanced quicker by working on the underlying causes, or do I need to support that person because they're perimenopausal and heading into menopause? And the current thinking is that hormone support is helpful for women in menopause. I have had one client where no amount of estrogen or progesterone supplementation made any difference whatsoever to her hormone levels. And we circled back to the buckets and found that she was back in mold.
Mm.
So I would encourage you with these downstream things. So we know that the immune system, hormones, the thyroid, and metabolism are controlled by the autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system is affected by stresses. So I do use progesterone more than estrogen. I've had similar fails in terms of the new prescription progesterone medication. It's not as well tolerated as bioidentical. But I would encourage you to see the underlying cause and work on that. So we come back to the 4 buckets, what's really driving this stressor. If the autonomic nervous system is in blocked regulation, which I discussed in my talk, then hormones will be affected by autoimmunity. They will also be affected by blocked regulation. And in the case of blocked regulation, no amount of hormone supplementation you'll never be able to really balance that hormone supplementation until the underlying cause is started to address. So I would encourage you to not try and assign it to one thing, like is MCAS caused by estrogen or is MCAS caused by, something, but come back to the overall load that the immune system's trying to deal with. Okay, we've got one more question, and there's several bits to it, so this is from Jenny. So she's saying that okay, I'll read the whole thing because it's just easier. So I started watching your talk with Beth and had a light bulb moment. At the start of this whole shebang, I had a tonsillectomy. I was in a lot of subsequent pain in the face, blocked ears, etc., and had to work with a TMJ physio for quite a while. After a virus that same year, I subsequently developed CFS, HIT, and possibly MCAS. Now I realise my cranial nerves and vagus nerves were impacted in the operation. My neck and shoulder muscles are still hard as a rock. Who or what type of practitioner would you suggest I see to work on physically restoring this area, which I assume she's meaning her face.
And did she say, I struggle with audio processing.
Yes.
Did she say what kind of surgery it was?
It started with a tonsillectomy. Okay. So the tonsils, of course, are a major lymphatic organ.
Yeah.
And one has to wonder what was stuck, what that tonsils were trying to process.
I was trying to figure out how and at what extent these cranial nerves were affected and the tissue around it.
Yeah, so she's saying tonsillectomy, subsequent pain in the face, blocked ears, etc. So subsequent, she then had a virus and then her symptoms impacted. So
okay,
my reading is, as we know, the face is integrally important to the vagus nerve and our cranial nerves and how we process things. So if you even have TMJ, I have a client at the moment who's in blocked regulation simply because she has TMJ. So it has her in a sympathetic state permanently because the nerves are being affected. So if the nerves are affected, I would recommend a cranial sacral practitioner to check the structure of the face and its effect on regulation. That would be my first step. If there's still issues with dental, I usually get people to get a cone beam scan. Now, in Australia, and this client is in Australia, there are very few dentists that actually do cone beam scans. So if they're doing a cone beam scan, they probably know what they're doing, and then see what needs to happen from there. What would your approach be, Beth?
Well, I agree with you on absolutely checking this out structurally, because my mind went down a few roads, and there's so many questions I would like to ask, but was something thrown off in your neck structurally from that surgery and the way that it was positioned, which makes me think, was there underlying hypermobility to where that would affect somebody with hypermobility a lot more? And particularly going in, to the tonsils, we're going to have this jaw open for a long time, but just having a surgery can really throw off vertebrae and put pressure on nerves. Sometimes we have to get in with an upper cervical chiropractor if it's that atlas. I found, and I've had significant neck damage and injuries, plus Bartonella causing severe inflammation of these nerves. And so it's almost always multifactorial. So my guess is we've got a combination of an inflammatory thing going on from whatever the virus it was. Maybe it was an HSV virus, who knows, something that affected the nervous system. And was it something that was harboring in the tonsils and then got, liberated as those tonsils were getting disturbed? And so I think checking out, craniosacral, I don't know if in Australia you have osteopaths who do cranial work.
Yes.
But if there is the biodynamic method, that's so refined, and I've had both, and oh my gosh, that biodynamic method is amazing. And can help calm that inflammation. And then I'm thinking on the inflammation side, just things like lemon balm topically behind the ears. You call it lemon balm or Melissa, or okay. And then topical GABA cream, things to get around those vagal nerves. And then up here, I do a lot of for this nerve pain. I make a mixture with castor oil because that delivers most deeply into the tissues. Castor oil, and I put in willow bark tincture, which you got to mix it really well because that's alcohol based, and we're mixing in oil. And then I'll add things like frankincense. I add a blend called Deep Blue that's got like wintergreen and blue tansy. I add some frankincense, and I mix all that up and put that on. And then I often put that on with topical CBD. I'm thinking, putting these topicals in here, and then even things like magnesium threonate, GABA, things that just really soothe the nervous system inflammation. L-theanine, hinokiol is wonderful for that. PEA, the supplement by Miraco or Vitanica or Vitalitas. Those can be really good. LVN also for people with chronic nerve pain, nerve inflammation, really good. Low dose naltrexone. And it's kind of a series. If there's hypermobility and ligament damage, prolotherapy is a game changer. You got to get to a certain level of where you're got your mast cell inflammation managed. And then I always recommend preloading mast cell supports. But prolotherapy is the only way to regenerate ligaments.
Yeah.
And I've had numerous rounds because of the extent of spine injuries I've had. Absolute game changer. Just such a game. And I had my jaw done because of the TMJ. And I'm like, I didn't even realize how much this was dysregulating my nervous system until I got stability here. And it was like night and day. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's so important. There's a couple of other parts. I'm conscious of time, so I might answer a couple of them and ask you just to chime in. So she's had hives for about 6 weeks. I changed my vitamin C. I've also had a stressful event. What should I do? I'm now on a low histamine diet, 3 milligrams of vitamin C, quercetin, LDN for CFS, and vitamin B. Now, we can't really give you detailed personal advice, but going back to our initial comment, the stress is key. And obviously stress can affect the neck and shoulder muscles as well. You're saying that they're still rock hard. In my experience, trauma or unprocessed stress is often held in this area. And sometimes when craniosacral therapists start releasing people, that can help. But I think I'd really encourage you, Jenny, to work with a practitioner to find the underlying causes. I think you've got lots of the threads, but stress is likely triggering the hives. There could be other bits and pieces, because you're on quercetin, you're on LDN and other bits and pieces. But without knowing your full story, please consider the role of stress on symptoms. Do you have anything? Sorry, I'm just trying to end on time, but
Yeah.
obviously
I agree
detailed advice, but
I would agree with all that, and then can consider if there is environmental exposure. I've seen a lot of intractable hives with mold exposure. So really paying attention to that, especially when people have already done low histamine diet, they're doing the right things. They're taking some, an antihistamine, they're taking supplements. Stress and mold and that combo are big ones for hives.
Beautiful.
Skin always connects to the gut.
And then the last bit from Jenny is, can people with AMCAS or HIT take Akkermansia? I've had some tests done that show I have zero Akkermansia, and my naturopath at the time gave me some supplements to grow it, but subsequent testing showed it was still zero. Since then, the supplement Akkermansia is available.
Yeah. That's one of the ones, it's good to get tested first, because sometimes people have high, they have an overgrowth. You don't want to supplement what you have an overgrowth of. But I've not had issues with histamine intolerance or anything like that with the Akkermansia. But those kinds of probiotics, the live probiotics, they're going to be, once you stop taking them, you really have to go after the terrain. And so what I would suggest in that is spore-based probiotics, which help in addition to the Akkermansia, which just help repopulate the gut longer term on the spore base. And then really Tributyrin. And I love Tributyrin X by Healthy Gut is my favorite butyrate supplement. It's just the highest quality on the market. But if you can't take the soft gel, or you can't do gelatin, if you have alpha-gal or you're vegetarian, the liquid butyrate from Pure Encapsulations is probably second best. But you're going to lose a lot of it. It's not going to in the stomach acid. So that's why I like that Tributyrin. It's enteric coated and makes it where it needs to go.
And I think just as a closing comment, Jenny, there's lots of symptoms here, valid symptoms and supplements, but the underlying question is, what is triggering all of this? We're suspecting TMJ type or some sort of face issue. I would go and see a cranial sacral person, an osteo. I have a fantastic one here locally, but I'm not sure about where you are. Just to find out what actually is happening. We're suspecting stress, but there's likely other stresses. So we need to keep coming back to those 4 buckets of infections, toxins, unprocessed stress, which we think there is, and electrical stresses, which dental would fall into that category. So would EMFs, and so actually would things like PTSD, actually. So I would encourage you to just sort of reframe what's happening for you to go after those buckets. And if you systematically empty those buckets, the body will regain balance. That's sort of my experience. So just in closing, I just want to check whether Claire M and I see Sharon's joined have any final quick questions. Otherwise, we will love you and leave you. Doesn't look like it. So thanks so much. Thank you so much, Beth, for making this time available. It's just really refreshing to be able to speak to someone who gets what's going on and is on the same page. And I'm sure I'm going to send this out to everyone who's purchased the summit, and I'm sure there'll be something for someone.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this. And I just want to thank everybody for joining, and everybody who's listening to this afterwards, being on this journey with us, because, if it wasn't for you all, there'd be no reason for us to be here. And I have learned more from the MCAS community than I've learned from any book, any training program. And it's just, even the questions are informative. So we're all in this together, and we can all heal this together. And the more we heal, this is what I'm really in it for, is I want people to get back to eating out with their families and getting to eat tasty food and travel. But I'm really in it for us getting back to living our missions on this planet, so that we can all come together and really heal ourselves, and then support the healing of each other and the healing of this only home that we have.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Beth.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Take care.
All right, good night.